In this video, I'm going to walk you through the deformers that exist inside of Unreal Engine. These are GPU deformers, which means they're very fast, very easy to work with, and we've got a couple different ones to choose from. Let's dive in. So here I'm using shot 80. It is a more involved shot with a bunch of different characters, and unlike most of the other examples I've been filming so far and showing you these different tools and workflows, I'm not going to go into the live control rigs. We totally could, but in this case, I'm just going to use the baked animation subsequence. I'm going to jump right in here. We've got all of our characters ready to go. And I'm just going to grab anim beta here. I'm also going to add a camera cut track just so I can get out of the camera view and go find him over here. And I'm going to show you how to add deformers onto whether you have a control rig or animation sequence, it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do is I just need to find a skeletal mesh actor in my sequencer, which we have here. So for beta, so here towards the beginning of the shot, he's not so preoccupied. I'm going to grab his character. I'm going to go to add, and I'm going to add a control rig, but I'm not going to add just like a regular like body posing control rig. I actually want to grab a deformer from the control rig menu. Now you can scroll around and you'll find some of them in here, but if you also want to filter, you can also hit this little filter button and you can specify like, ooh, I want to find, for example, a deformer or a deformer utility. But if I hit the little check marks for deformer, I now have a little button that'll filter by deformers. So that'll make it a little bit quicker. So this will show some of the ones we're going to cover today. I'm going to show you first the Sculpt Deformer. A Sculpt Deformer, once I add it on here, will put this into my scene. So right here we have CRD, which stands for Control Rig Deformer _ Sculpt Deformer. Twirl that open, and we have a few different pieces of it. If I make sure that my my game mode stuff is off, I need to back out and turn off the lighting. There's a lot of extra icons in the way. I'll also turn off effects. That's going to get rid of some of the spark Niagara elements, clear things up a little bit. So back to my animation sequence. Once we add the Sculpt Deformer, it's going to add this little ball around the character's waist. And the Sculpt Deformer comes in three pieces. We have the Sculpt Deformer, the handle, and the mask. So the Sculpt Deformer itself, this is the thing we want to move around, and this is what's going to control kind of where our deformations are living. So I'm just going to place this on his head for now. And I'll make it a little bit smaller so you can really localize the effect in just a moment. And then we also have the handle. Now the handle is this little blue ball on top, and this is the thing that's going to actually make it fun. Off the bat, you can see what we're doing, right? So I can kind of pull this up. If I take the Sculpt Deformer and make it larger, you're going to see that it affects a lot more of his head. Grab the handle again. Oops, that's not the handle. This is the handle. If I could grab it, here we go. And there you go. This is a Sculpt Deformer. It allows you to just make little cosmetic changes to a mesh. And what's really cool about it is how fast it is, right? You can do this on a metahuman. The really advanced, realistic characters, this works on them too. Bloop. So if he gets, hit in the head by a robot, you can just punch his head in. Very cartoony. But this works on any skeletal mesh character or asset, period. Because it's GPU bound, it's very fast, very lightweight. You can do this. You can do multiple of these. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with them. You can also change the fall off. So if I go back to the Sculpt Deformer itself, we have some different attributes in the anim details. For example, we have the fall off, which will adjust sort of how that handle is going to propagate throughout the ball. We also have the side fall off, which is sort of the outer bounds to feather the change beyond the bounds of the circle or the sphere. Things like that. We have an aim mode, which is sort of whether this thing is like pointing in that direction. I can show you. If I go back to the Sculpt Deformer, we have aim mode. So that kind of spins the normal direction of the deformer as a whole. So if you can kind of keep what's happening here in your mind, his head's like, boom, 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 boom. He's kind of doing like a headbang. But if I switch the deformer back to no aim mode, you can see that when I mess with the handle, it's a little bit different. Anyways, there's also the weight, which is that if you have this thing turned on like that, you can just kind of deactivate the thing overall. So you just have it not active and then active later. And you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with this. You can have the Sculpt Deformer you can constrain it to stuff, you can attach it to things, you can leave it somewhere so that when a character's hand comes into contact, things happen. You can also specify, hey, don't affect the entire character, just mess with the head up to the neck, for example. And that's what this is here. This mask bone picker via space switcher. It uses spaces and masking over here, bone masks, to sort of limit where this can affect things. That's something that I'm covering in YouTube videos on my channel. I've got that in my classes, but we've got more deformers to go into. So I'm going to keep moving forward. Now I can just delete this deformer off the character. Let's do another one. I'll take beta. I'll add another control rig, and this time I'll filter by deformer again, and I'll grab a lattice. Now the lattice you may have noticed in a previous shot, that was actually in when he grabs the door and he smashes the door into the floor. We get that slow motion moment. There was a lattice on the door, and this was how that was done. So the deformer for the lattice, same kind of thing. We have the deformer as a whole. So we have a controller to be able to sort of position the whole thing and figure out where you want it, which can be very, very handy because you kind of want to set this thing up. And then we have all the individual points. And so this is going to do exactly what you'd probably expect. It's going to warp and skew the character based on, where they fall within the box. So if I come over here, if I can just grab this, you'll grab this one. If there's nothing in that section, nothing really gets affected. And if I go over here, see there's the hand, there's the wrist. And the crazy thing about this is this is a 3D deformer effect. And all of the animation still works, right? So we've got all this weird wiggly animation happening now. But it's important to keep in mind, see how this hand is being pulled and stretched like crazy. The robot is not. The reason for this, right? So the robots are not being affected by all this because the robots don't have the deformer applied to them. This is applied only to this one skeletal mesh. If I wanted this to affect the robot, I could probably copy paste this lattice onto the robot or make a similar one. You could add this lattice with the same deformations onto different characters, and then you would get it on all of them. But this is sort of a per character control rig. So it gives you very granular control. I can also mute it, so I can kind of see before and after. And it's important to keep in mind that with a lattice, this is definitely a later in the game thing. You do this when you're kind of done with animation. Because if I take the lattice and move it around, I can kind of move the whole character through it, which is really interesting and weird. But that's why it's kind of helpful to know, where your character is going to be and what the animation is going to end up before you deal with this. Because if I put this here and start animating, the character is going to move through it. So anyway, you do the animation first, then you do the lattice later, and you can see it does not affect the robots. So that is a lattice deformer. And then one more I want to cover super, super fast, and that is if I go back to beta and I go to control rig, deformer, we have the camera space lattice. Now this is what I'm just going to kind of glaze over, but we have a camera space lattice, which is down here at the feet. This one is designed to be constrained to a camera. So if I go ahead and just say, hey, constrain, parent constraint, camera. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of the offset. So I can right click on the constraint. I can turn off the offset. Boop. So now you can see that it kind of moves with the camera as the camera moves around. And if I look through the camera, boop, I have this little window. Now the scale is a little bit off. I need to adjust for aspect ratio and things like that. So here I have an aspect ratio and a field of view slider that I can play with to get the exact settings that I need. But if I just kind of bump this up close enough so that you can see it. But now what I'm able to do is sort of take this lattice itself and adjust it. So I'm going to grab my soft selection. I'll grab some points here and I'll just I'll move it around. And so if I want to get some squash and stretch and just smear frames essentially, you can see that I'm now able to sculpt the actual rig from this camera's perspective. And you can see that it's a bit weird, right? He's all warped and bizarre, and that is a 3D effect. That is actually happening to the character based on that sort of projection, which is really interesting. And so once again, that's only applying to a single character. I'd need to do the work and then apply this to other rigs as well. But the deformers are really, really cool. And the main one that I am going to recommend that you probably want to play with is if I get rid of this, I can just go to my character any character, and you're going to just add the Sculpt Deformer. That is probably the one you want to mess with. It is the easiest one to get the hang of, and by far the most satisfying most of the time anyways, right? Because that's the one that's giving you this really fun, like, cartoony effect. Just keep in mind that you might want to scale it up or down to localize the effects. So if you're trying to get it to be some kind of fun, like, Looney Tunes impact, you're going to want to make it quite a bit smaller than it comes in at, and then play with the handle to do all the fun stuff. But yeah, between the Sculpt tool and the lattice, you've got a lot of fun stuff to play with, so enjoy.